Many stories claim to be true, simply to add a chill down your spine. They are tales told around a campfire, a disclaimer on a poster, nothing more. But this is not one of them. This is the story of a family who in the 1970s claimed they lived through an agony far more terrifying than any film could portray. They were a family torn from their beds by unseen hands, tormented by whispers in the dead of night, and stalked by the suffocating spirit of a witch who had clawed her way back from hell. This is the true story of Blackwood Farm, and it is infinitely more terrifying than the fiction you know. In 1971, Ronan and Elara Callahan, along with their 5 young daughters, moved into a sprawling, weathered farmhouse in Harrisville, Rhode Island. It was meant to be a new beginning, but the very first piece of advice they received was not a welcoming gesture, but a desperate plea from a neighbor whose eyes held a deep, unspoken fear. "For the sake of your family," the man had said, his voice barely a whisper, "leave the lights on at night." Gasp. It began subtly, as these things always do. A deceptive quiet. Things would move on their own. The floorboards overhead would creak with the weight of footsteps when everyone was downstairs. It was nothing you couldn't explain away in an old house. The family didn't speak of it, each member holding their own quiet fear, hoping it was just their imagination. But the serenity of this mundane haunting was short-lived. The Callahan children soon realized they were not alone. At first the entities seemed benevolent, almost gentle. The younger girls spoke of a spirit woman who would visit them some nights. They claimed she would tuck the blankets snugly under their chins and place a cold, weightless kiss upon their foreheads. "At first I thought it was Mom," one of the daughters, Cynthia, would later recall. But something was. Her sister Andrea knew it too. Mom smelled like ivory soap. This spirit, it smelled of flowers and rotting fruit. For a time they learned to coexist with these quieter ghosts. But peace is a fragile thing in a place like Blackwood Farm. Soon more malevolent forces began to bleed through the cracks in the walls. The daughters claimed they were attacked in the barn by entities they could not see, leaving them with scratches and bruises. Then came the voices. One night Cynthia crawled into bed with her older sister, her body trembling with a terror so profound she could barely speak. She claimed a disembodied voice had whispered a secret to her from the darkness of her room. "It told me," she sobbed, "that there are 7 dead soldiers buried in the wall." As the girls were being tormented by the dead, a sickening daily ritual began. Every morning, at precisely 5:15, a foul, gag-inducing stench of putrefying meat would rise from the floors, so potent it would physically force the family from their beds, choking and retching. Around this time, the girls were visited by a new presence, a male spirit. The horror it inflicted upon them was so profound, a violation so deep, that to this day the sisters refuse to speak of the concrete details. "Let's just say," Andrea stated, her voice cold and distant, "there was a very bad male spirit in the home, with 5 little girls. You'd think they would have fled then, even with nowhere to go. But astonishingly they stayed, trapped. While the entire family suffered, Elara Callahan, the mother, seemed to bear the brunt of the house's hatred. She knew something was fundamentally wrong the night she woke to find a woman in a tattered gray dress standing beside her bed. The apparition's face was a mask of rage as she moaned a single chilling threat. "Get out, get out. I will drive you out with death and gloom." The woman in gray was believed to be the ghost of Bathsheba Thayer, a witch, a woman who had lived and, according to local legend, died on that land centuries ago. She considered herself the true mistress of the house, and she saw Elara as a rival, a competition to be broken and discarded. Bathsheba's attacks began as cruel poltergeist tricks, pinches from unseen fingers, pokes in the ribs, shoves down the stairs. But when that didn't drive them away, she escalated her war. She decided to possess Elara, to wear her body like a suit of flesh, and turn the mother's own hands against her family. Possessing Elara gave the witch the power to inflict unimaginable physical and emotional pain, leaving the real Elara weak, drained, and a prisoner in her own mind. Desperate, the family sought the help of Elias and Serafina Vance, paranormal investigators who dealt with the darkest corners of the spiritual world. The moment the couple set foot in the house, Serafina claimed she felt a presence so profoundly evil it chilled her to the bone. They decided to conduct a seance in the basement. It did not go as planned. It made everything so much worse. Serafina Vance would never publicly speak of the specific events that transpired in that cellar. She would only say that what happened that night disturbed her to her very soul. But Andrea Callahan knows what happened. She snuck down to the basement to watch, and she claimed she was never able to look at her mother the same way again. My mother, she recalled, began to speak a language not of this world, in a voice that was not her own. Her chair didn't just shake, it levitated 6 feet off the dirt floor, and then with impossible force, her body was hurled across the room, slamming against the stone wall like a rag doll. The haunting only intensified. In the film, this period is depicted by a spooky game of hide and clap. The reality was far more harrowing. One day the girls were playing hide and seek on the farm. Cynthia chose to hide in a large old pine box in the barn, one with no lock or latch. After no one found her, she decided to get out. But the lid wouldn't open. She pushed, she kicked, she screamed until her throat was raw, but no one could hear her. The air grew thin. Panic, cold and absolute, set in. 20 minutes later, her sister Nancy simply walked by and lifted the lid with ease. Was it just a crappy old box? Or was something holding it shut? The family finally sold the house in 1980. The man they sold it to began a restoration project. He fled one afternoon, screaming, leaving behind his car, his tools, and all of his clothing. But Bathsheba's curse was not bound to the property. It was bound to them. Years later, during the filming of The Conjuring, the family was invited to the set, all but Elara, who at the last minute was overcome with a dreadful premonition and refused to go. While the family was on set, a sudden violent gale erupted from a cloudless sky, knocking over cameras and lights. At that exact moment, hundreds of miles away, Elara Callahan fell and broke her hip. When her children rushed to her hospital room, they claim she sat bolt upright in her bed, her eyes wide with a familiar terror, and uttered the witch's curse. She does not want to be exposed. Why did they stay for nearly a decade? Why not just leave? The answer is as simple as it is cruel. They were poor. The economy was in shambles. There was no money to move, and the value of their cursed 200-acre farm was plummeting by the day. They were trapped not just by a spirit, but by circumstance. In the end, you must decide for yourself what you believe. But as you sit in the comfort of your own home, ask yourself this: what chains bind you to the place you feel safe? And what horrors would you endure before you found the strength to